Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, discussing a quarter century of settled science. Mark Twain said, "There's something fascinating about science. One gets such wholesale returns of conjecture out of such a trifling investment of fact." And in no field of science is this more true than with climate science. Greta Thunberg's relative, Svante Arrhenius, started pushing the idea of catastrophic global warming well over a century ago. He predicted that everybody was going to have to move to Siberia in Canada because it was going to be too hot every place else. He predicted that Siberia will become the greatest farming country in the world and that Antarctica will become very much like the climate of Western Canada. He also predicted the extinction of the human race due to global warming and that the oceans were going to get hot enough to boil. This was an idea which was picked up again 115 years later by Stephen Hawking. The whole point of climate alarmism was that Earth was going to get extremely hot. But when New York City had one of their largest snowstorms on record 25 years ago in 1996, the New York Times shifted gears and blamed the blizzard on global warming. They said that warming oceans were evaporating more moisture into the atmosphere and making it snow more. Most people had been previously unaware that boiling ocean water would produce snow. But 4 years later, The Independent announced snowfalls are now just a thing of the past. According to Dr. David Viner, a senior research scientist at the Climatic Research Unit of the University of East Anglia, within a few years, winter snowfall will become a very rare and exciting event. Children just aren't going to know what snow is, he said. And then 3 years later, in 2003, the United Nations reported that global warming threatened the ski industry. They said that it was going to become too warm to snow at low elevations. The Guardian reported on the United Nations' grim forecast for winter sports as global warming increases. They said that up to half of Switzerland's ski resorts could face economic hardship or bankruptcy. And 9 years later, in 2012, the New York Times reported the same thing. Skiing was doomed due to global warming. Climate scientists have been saying that the Arctic is overheating, the ice is melting, and the polar bears are drowning. The story was that there was no longer enough cold air in the Arctic to make it possible for strong cold fronts to reach the mid-latitudes. But then when the United States started getting blasted by one polar vortex after another accompanied by record snow, the climate scientists changed their story again. They started saying that incredibly cold Arctic air was finding its way down to Texas and freezing people to death. And the New York Times and Washington Post started quite predictably blaming the record cold and snow on global warming, just like they did 25 years earlier. At least 6 of New York's 10 largest snowstorms have occurred since the year 2000. So they had to quit talking about the demise of snow and start blaming the cyclically heavy snowfall on global warming. They say that global warming is disrupting the Arctic and bringing very cold Arctic air down here. And at the same time, they say there isn't any cold air in the Arctic, the ice is melting and the polar bears are drowning. But the reality is that September through March snow cover in the northern hemisphere has been steadily increasing for 50 years. This is because cold Arctic air has been intruding further and further south, which has brought the freeze line closer to the equator. Precipitation which used to fall as rain is now falling as snow. This is what I saw when I stepped outside this morning in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I didn't really feel like I was burning up. And here's Kyrie watching some children sled yesterday. They were born a long time after climate experts said children just aren't going to know what snow is. And if it isn't bad enough that children aren't going to know what snow is, they're also not going to know what beaches are. In 1995, the New York Times predicted that most beaches on the east coast of the United States would be gone in 25 years. That would have been last year. So according to climate scientists and the press, children not only don't know what snow is, but they also don't know what sand is. But St. Greta is undaunted and remains on her campaign to save the planet from global warming. This kept her out of school for a couple of years. And you can't blame her because she has a family global warming legacy to uphold. Her uncle started this scam more than 120 years ago, and her father is named after the great scientist Svante Arrhenius. And with her family legacy, you really can't blame Greta for staying out of Swedish schools. Besides his belief in global warming, her uncle Svante Arrhenius also believed in electrocuting school children. He ran experiments in Swedish classrooms where he electrified the classroom without the children's knowledge, and he said this made the children brighter and made them grow faster. Here's the apparatus which Professor Arrhenius used to electrify children. This photograph from 1912 is captioned, "How Professor Arrhenius was able to perform his experiment without the knowledge of the children is illustrated in the picture." So who could blame Greta for wanting to stay out of Swedish schools? Her family has a very long history of global warming crazy. Toto is hoping that we'll once again get enough global warming to melt the snow so that we can walk past the end of the street. You can visit him and Kyrie on the web at rollclimatescience.com.